you've heard the saying, jack of all trades, master of none, right? You've heard that before. I had not heard the one that's here. A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. And really that's true, right? Are you more valuable if you can do a little bit of everything or if you can only do one thing? I thought you'd get a kick out of this picture about the cell phone, right? Oh, so you're the one who took all our jobs, right? When you think about it, the cell phone is the jack of all trades, right? Think about when was the last time you actually used a calculator, right? Or a regular calendar, right? Or did snail mail, or had a camera to take a picture, or listened to the old-fashioned radio, right? So the cell phone does all things well. The smartphone, I should say, right? In our text for today from the Gospel of Mark, Mark reports to us what the people were saying about Jesus. And what they were saying about Jesus is, Jesus does all things well. And truly, he was and is the jack of all trades and is the master of all those trades as well. And the more we learn about Jesus, the more it becomes clear that he does all things well. In the two stories that Mark relates to us in the section we're going to look at this morning, we see Jesus encountering two different individuals. And Jesus is able to minister to them in unique and marvelous ways, showing that he does indeed do all things well. So, story number one is Jesus and a Gentile mother with a demon-possessed daughter. Mark begins the story with these words. He got up and departed from there to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, but he could not escape notice. So after Mark has reported to us all the activities of Jesus around the Sea of Galilee, as we've been seeing, he's there in Capernaum and he goes across and he comes back and he goes across, right? Now he reports that Jesus decided to go north and into Gentile territory. Now, perhaps he was looking for an opportunity for rest. We see that going on, right? He keeps looking for a way to get away and to get some rest. Or perhaps he's looking for a way to get away from the mounting opposition from the Jewish authorities in that area. Beyond the numerous times we read about Jesus' travels across the Sea of Galilee to the region of the Decapolis, which is not Jewish territory, this trip up north may have been the only time that Jesus left the land of Judah, except for those times across the Sea of Galilee. So that's kind of interesting, right? So Tyre is about 25 miles south of Sidon. You see that at the top of the map. And about 50 miles north of Nazareth. So that area called Phoenicia is up there along the coast. It goes about 150 miles. And Tyre had been an important seacoast even back in the days of King David and King Solomon. Because Mark wrote his gospel with a Gentile audience in mind, it seems that Mark gives more attention to the fact that Jesus' ministry is not just to the Jews, but is also to the Gentiles. Also keep in mind that in the last teaching opportunity that Jesus had that we looked at last week, Jesus declared that the distinction between clean and unclean were being removed and cast aside. They're no longer necessary. Remember, he talked about what goes into a person is not what makes them unclean, but what comes out of a person. Remember that discussion? And so as Jesus ventures up into Gentile territory and likely going to the home of a Gentile, he's putting that on display, that this distinction between clean and unclean is going away. So upon his arrival in Tyre, he went into a house, apparently planning to spend some time for some freedom and some anonymity, but his popularity preceded him, right? He couldn't escape notice. Somehow word got out that he'd come to town. Mark wrote, instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she was asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So this Gentile woman had somehow become a believer in Jesus, a believer in his power, in his ability. And so she made her way directly to him and boldly to him, right? How did she know about Jesus? How had she heard about his power and his ministry? Well, let me remind you that actually Mark has reported to us that many people from that region of Tyre had already put their faith in Jesus. Back in Mark chapter 3, in verse 7, Mark reported Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea. A large crowd followed from Galilee. A large crowd followed from Judea, Jerusalem, Eudema, beyond the Jordan, and around Tyre and Sidon. The word had already spread up there about Jesus. So this woman knew she had none of the religious or moral or cultural credentials to be able to approach a Jewish rabbi. She's a Phoenician. She's a Gentile. She's a pagan. She's a woman. She has a daughter with an unclean spirit. But she didn't care, right? None of that stopped her. She entered the house without an invitation. She fell down at Jesus' feet and she begged him to exorcise the demon from her daughter. Now, the word translated here, beg, or asking him, is in the present progressive form, which means it's an ongoing thing. She kept on begging. She kept on asking. And interestingly enough, in Matthew's account of this, the disciples got frustrated with this. This woman's incessant asking. They asked Jesus to send her away. Mark didn't record that, but Matthew did. And we can all understand why she had this boldness, why she had this steadfastness. She's a parent. She has a daughter in need. You know, people can fall into different categories, right? You got the category of coward. You got the category of regular folk. You got the category of heroes. And then you got the category of parents. Is there anything a parent won't do for their child if their child is in need? I don't think so. So it's not surprising what this desperate mother is willing to do for her daughter. So how did Jesus respond to this Gentile woman's desperate demand? Mark wrote, he said to her, let the children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now, if you're like me, your reaction to Jesus' words is shock, a bit of horror, right? Oh my goodness. Jesus is speaking in such offensive terms. It's so insulting, right? Now, we live in a very canine-loving world. Many of you have your pets, you have your dogs, and they're a member of the family, right? In the time of Jesus, there were some pets, but most dogs were wild, right? Most dogs were not house pets. And in Jesus' day, the Jews often referred to the Gentiles as dogs because they were unclean in their mind, right? Was Jesus trying to be cruel? Was Jesus trying to be insulting? Many commentators have concluded, and I agree with them, Jesus was speaking to her in a parabolic way. He's communicating to her in a metaphor. And one of the keys to understanding what Jesus said is the fact that he used a different word for dogs than most of the time we see in the Bible. He used the word puppies. That changes it a little bit, right? That changes it a little bit. Now remember, this woman is a mother, and so what Jesus was saying to her was, you know how families eat. First, the children eat at the table, and then afterward, then the pets get to eat. The puppies, the pets. But it's not right to take the children's food before they've had a chance to eat. and feed it to the animals, even the household pets. Matthew gives a longer version of Jesus' answer, where Jesus goes on to explain, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. And so Jesus' priority in his ministry has been on the people of God, the Israelites, showing them that he is their Messiah, the one they've been waiting for, that he's the fulfillment of all of the Old Testament promises and prophecies, right? And so his words in that sense are not the insult that they might appear to be at face value. What Jesus was saying was, please understand, there's an order here. I'm going to Israel first, and then the Gentiles and the other nations later. But here's the amazing thing. This Gentile woman got the point of what Jesus was saying and came back with an astonishing reply. Mark tells us she replied to him, Lord, even the dogs, even the puppies under the table eat the children's crumbs. Yes, Lord, she says, I get it, but the puppies eat from the table too, and I'm here for mine. Now, commentators also point out that wealthy people in that day even used bread as their napkins to clean off their hands and then toss that dirtied bread onto the floor for the animals to eat. But Jesus had told her a parable in which he gave her something that was a bit of a challenge. Israel first and then everybody else. But then also gave her an offer, right? And she responded to the challenge, basically saying, I understand, I'm not from Israel. I don't worship your God the way the Israelites do. I don't have a place at the table. I accept that. I'll be happy with my place under the table, right? She didn't take offense. She didn't try to stand on her rights. She said, I might not have a place at the table, but there's more than enough on the table for everyone, and I'm happy to be under the table and to be satisfied with the scraps. You see how remarkable it is? She recognized and accepted both the challenge of Jesus' words and the offer of those words. But let's notice the conclusion of the story. Mark wrote, then he told her, because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. And she went back to her home, and she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Think about the wisdom this woman displayed, right? Think about the humility. Think about the faith. Jesus was so pleased by her response that he granted her request. And when he said, because of this reply, he was speaking like a teacher. Great answer. Amazing answer, right? It's amazing how God's chosen people often didn't get it. And yet the Gentiles often got it before they did. In the Gospels, we see Jesus complimenting faith. And guess whose faith he usually compliments? It's the Gentiles. The woman here, the centurion, remember the Roman centurion? One commentator wrote, what an irony. Jesus seeks desperately to teach his chosen disciples, and yet they're dull and uncomprehending. Jesus is reluctant to even speak to a walk-on pagan woman, and after one sentence, she understands his mission, and receives his unambiguous commendation. She answers from within the parable, that is, in the terms by which Jesus addressed her. And this indicates she's the first person in the gospel to hear the word of Jesus directly to her. She got it. I understand I'm a puppy under the table, but I'm okay with that. Martin Luther was amazed and moved by this encounter. And he wrote about it. He said this woman understood the gospel. The gospel declares you're more wicked than you ever believed. but at the same time, you're more loved and accepted than you ever dared to hope. On the one hand, she wasn't too proud to accept what the gospel said about her unworthiness. But on the other hand, she wasn't too insulted or discouraged to take up God's offer for the scraps. And in that sense, there's two ways that we can get in the way of Jesus being our Savior. One of those ways is by having a superiority complex, where we say, I'm good enough, I don't need God. The other way is to have an inferiority complex, where we say, I'm so bad, God could never love me, God would never want me, right? But no one is so good they don't need God. And no one is so bad that God doesn't want them. This woman understood her need, and she understood God's offer. Now, can you imagine the grand homecoming, right? When she got home and found her daughter released from the prison of that demon and well and healthy again. Can you imagine that grand reunion? And imagine the testimony that that woman had to tell others about that Jewish rabbi who had healed her daughter of a demon by speaking a word from a distance. He didn't even have to be in the presence of the girl to heal her. And think about how she would say, and he even did it for me, a Gentile, a foreigner, a pagan. Jesus indeed does all things well. Well, what's your testimony about what God has done for you, right? What's your testimony about what God has freed you from? And how He loved you even in your awful, unworthy state. Allowed you to become one of His children. Story number 2. Jesus and a Gentile man who's deaf. Now, John MacArthur begins his commentary with this little riddle here. Who is permitted to speak but is not able, and able to speak but is not permitted? And the answer to the riddle is the deaf man in our story. We'll see how that comes into play. So Mark wrote, again, leaving the region of Tyre, he went by the way of Sidon, right? So that's north, right? North another 25 miles. Went by the way of Sidon and then to the Sea of Galilee, all the way around, right? To the region of the Decapolis, back down to that area. And they brought to him a deaf man who had difficulty speaking and begged Jesus to lay his hand on him. So Mark tells us he leaves Tyre, goes north to Sidon, then made that journey southeast back to the region of Decapolis. Now, some people speculate that this trip may have been as long as 8 months long. It'd be a long time, right? It is a big area, right? Now, Mark doesn't tell us why Jesus went in that direction, why he traveled in that way, nor does he tell us other stories that happened along the way. In Sidon or on the way down to the Decapolis, it's kind of a silent period, right? Now, you'll recall that the last time Jesus had been in the Decapolis had been the time when he healed the man from the legion of demons, sent those demons into the pigs, and they ran down the hillside and died in the lake, right? The Sea of Galilee. And how the people, in response to this, had begged Jesus to leave their region. And you remember that man who Jesus healed from all those demons asked if he could go with Jesus, but Jesus said, no. Stay here and tell people everything God has done for you. Now when Jesus comes this time, you see a different reaction from the people. Not get out of here, but they come rushing and bringing him people to be healed. What's the change? Maybe the testimony of that man and the effect of his work. So they brought to Jesus this deaf man who had difficulty speaking, Who the they is not described. Are they his friends and family? We don't know. There's certainly people who believe at this point that Jesus can do something to help him. The man who needed the healing is described as deaf, which is a term that can mean deaf, mute, or both. He's certainly deaf. He's not completely mute, but he has difficulty speaking, as you would expect. Most people who can't hear, you know how it sounds when they try to talk, right? It's not pretty. How did Jesus respond to their request? Mark wrote, "So he took him away from the crowd in private. After putting his fingers in the man's ears and spitting, he touched his tongue, and looking up to heaven, he sighed deeply and said to him, 'Ephathra, Ephathra,' which means be opened." Let's explore this story by asking a number of questions. First of all, why did Jesus take the man away from the crowd? Was it because he knew that the second the man could hear, it would be a bit of a shock? And if he's amongst a lot of people and the noise and the commotion might be too much for him, perhaps? Or was it that he wanted to protect the man's privacy? Knowing this guy had always been the object of everyone's laughter and joking, as people who have some handicapped often are, right? Think about he can't hear, and listen to him speak, and I'm sure he'd had a lot of teasing over the years. And so perhaps showing compassion, Jesus didn't want to make a spectacle of him at this point. Why did he put his finger into the man's ears and touch the man's tongue? Well, we know it's not because Jesus is doing some kind of hocus pocus, right? Some kind of miracle worker incantations, because Jesus never did healings that way. They were always very straightforward, right? They weren't any kind of sensational thing, right? So what is he doing? Many people think what he's doing is some kind of rudimentary sign language. Think about it, right? How do you communicate to someone who can't hear? Let's go over here. Okay? And I'm going to do something about your hearing. And I'm going to do something about your tongue. You see how that might be this trying to communicate, this is what I'm about to do for you. He couldn't just say it, I'm going to give you the ability to speak and hear. Perhaps that's what was going on. Why did Jesus spit? That's a good question. Some people believe that Jesus spit onto his own fingers and then touched the man's tongue with his saliva-covered fingers. I know that sounds kind of gross to us, right? People in that day did believe saliva had healing properties. Perhaps that's what he did. The Bible doesn't say he spit on his fingers and then touched the man's. He spit. I don't know why he spit, all right? I don't know where the spittle ended up, okay? I guess we can ask him when we get there. Why did Jesus look towards heaven and sigh deeply? Think about it. This man had spent his whole life reading people's facial expressions and their gestures, their body language, right? That's what this man, that's how he had tried to understand what was going on around him. So why did Jesus look to heaven? Again, to communicate, this is where the help is coming from. It's coming from God. And this is an important thing for all of us who are involved in ministering to others and serving others. In whatever ways we do, we must never be looking to get the credit for ourselves or to give people the impression that it's because we're so great and we have so much ability. It's always got to be, this is because of God. This is what motivates me to do it. This is what gives me the ability to do it. It is all about God. And then giving a deep sigh, Jesus communicated he understood how monumental this was for this guy. This is no small thing, right? He sighed deeply. It means he groaned, he moaned. And it's such an expression of pain as he identifies with this man's alienation and the isolation of his life. Finally, we notice he uttered that single word that changed this man's life. And he spoke it in Aramaic, which was Jesus' native tongue, and very well may have been the native tongue of this man. The word "be opened." What was the result of Jesus' command, "be open"? Mark said immediately his ears were open, his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak clearly. He ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more they proclaimed it. So as soon as Jesus said the word, "be opened," and I wonder if while the word was still being spoken, it happened. In other words, the first thing this guy heard was the voice of Jesus saying, "be opened." Can you imagine that? And it happened immediately. And the fact that this deaf man could speak clearly immediately says there's a double miracle involved here. There's the miracle of opening his hearing and the ability to speak. Someone who's lived their whole life deaf, who suddenly gets the ability to hear, like with a cochlear device, you've seen those? You know how they speak, right? Immediately, can they speak as well as any of us who've had hearing our whole lives? No. They have to learn how to speak. And even after a lot of work, they may still sound like they're speaking as a person who has been hearing impaired. But not this guy. It's instantaneous. He can hear and he can speak clearly. When Jesus does a miracle, the results are instantaneous and comprehensive. But how ironic. The next command that he gets after the command to open his hearing and speech is, now you can't say anything. The guy who couldn't speak but was allowed to now can't speak and shouldn't speak or isn't allowed to. It's very ironic. Now, Jesus gave that command in an attempt to control the direction of his ministry, right? Jesus wasn't just a miracle worker. He wasn't just there to heal people. Physically, his mission was much greater than that. But the human ability to not tell about something so wonderful as this was not there, right? These people couldn't help. And just like the disciples, just like us, right? If someone tells us not to speak about God, not to tell the good things about God, not to teach God's word, we can't help but speak about the things we have seen and learned and heard, right? So Mark concluded the story with these words. They were extremely astonished. And they said, he has done everything well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. After casting out the demons from the man back in Mark 5, the people had begged him to leave. After doing this miracle, what do they say? They're correctly and properly praising God. He does all things well. Jesus does everything well. He does everything right. He does everything good. And he continues to do the same for us today. Now, I want to conclude today's segment, today's sermon, by pointing out the fact that Mark likely used this story and a special word in this story to point our attention to a prophecy in Isaiah 35. When Mark said the man was deaf and spoke with difficulty, that word "spoke with difficulty" is a word that's used only two places in the Bible. Here in Mark 7 and in Isaiah 35. In Isaiah 35, the prophet Isaiah has this to say about the Messiah who was to come. They will see the glory of the Lord, the splendor of our God. Strengthen the weak hands. Steady the shaking knees. Say to the cowardly, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. Vengeance is coming. God's retribution is coming. He will save you. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy. Mark's telling his readers, do you see the blind having their eyes opened? Do you see the deaf gaining their hearing? Do you hear the mute being able to shout for joy? God has come, just as Isaiah prophesied. God has come to save you. Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One. He is God come to save us. And here's another thing Mark wants his readers to think about. Isaiah said the Messiah would come to save us with divine retribution. But how is the Messiah saving with divine retribution? See, this is where the Jews got twisted, and they thought it was a military salvation, right? They thought it was an earthly thing, and it's a spiritual thing. Where is the divine retribution? Is Jesus smiting people? Has he taken out his sword? No. Look at him. Jesus isn't taking power, he is giving it away. He's not taking over the world, he's serving the world, and he's saving the world. Where is the divine retribution? Jesus didn't come to bring it, he came to bear it. On the cross, the Son of God bore the retribution that we deserved. On the cross, the Son of God was the castaway from the table who didn't even get any crumbs, so that we would become the children of God, adopted and brought in with a seat at the table. He became sin to take away our sin. He became mute so that our tongues might be loosed to call him King and to sing his praise. Jesus loves us that much. We are that valuable to God. And we must never be too proud to accept what the Bible says about our own unworthiness. That none of us is righteous. No, not one. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Everyone is lost apart from Christ. We must never be too downcast to accept that the gospel says how much we are loved. We must never believe that we're too lost that we can't be found, too far from home that we can't return. Jesus does all things well. And let's give Jesus a chance to do all things well in our lives, right? To set us free from our demons and our sins. To heal all our infirmities and bind up our brokenness, especially the spiritual ones. Jesus does all things well for everyone. No one is excluded. The gospel is for all. Not just the Israelites, but for the Gentiles, right? The gospel is for all, for everyone.